Our first presenter will be Hitoshi Abe. Since 1992, Hitoshi won the first prize in the Miyagi Stadium competition. He's maintained an active international design practice based in Sendai, Japan, and Los Angeles, as well as a schedule of lecturing and publishing, which place him among the leaders in his field. Known for his architecture that is spatially complex and structurally innovative, his work of Atelier Hitoshi Abe has been published internationally and received numerous awards in Japan and internationally. He has now a second office in Los Angeles, and he works on a series of projects outside of Japan, including invited competitions and an exhibition installation. As you know, he's professor and chair of the UCLA Department of Architecture and Urban Design. I'm really glad you can be with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. And I'm very much happy and honored to be here. No limitation, and we can go to the beyond of our imagination, but the program is very difficult for me to think, because it's all about, as you know, that the running school or department is all about under this kind of pressure and limitations. So today, I'm going to just talk of my wish about the one thing, and I want to share a kind of a issue that I really would like to solve with you. So I have to go very quickly. As you know, that I came here from Japan 4 years ago, or 4.5 years ago, and I have to say that I had no idea what the American School of Architecture is like. And then I was a little bit confused because of the differences between these two systems I experienced. Here, most of the core education is really tuned to how to raise an architect and how to provide the necessary information to become a good architect. But in Japan, the system is very much actually absorbed by the engineering, School of Engineering. So it is about actually how to actually educate the students for more general sort of knowledge of architecture. So there will be lots of students studying to become architect, but also engineers and contractors, or maybe sometime bureaucrats or scholar. So it's more research-oriented and versus trying to train the students for more pragmatic reason. And so when I came here, I was kind of surprised how this core program is rigidly designed to meet with NAAB and so on. So I kind of tried to see if there's any way, any room we can kind of move forward. And then this is a kind of diagram I created 4 years ago for the kind of ideal program. So the idea is, why don't we get out from a core program and then create or develop the area for the research, so that the technology will become interdisciplinary and culture will become intercultural, and practice will become more like outreach. And I started to see how we can really expand, explore this sort of a research area within a given program. So we did build a house on campus, and we collaborated with the different departments of the school. This is a collaboration with film and television for the stage set. We created a new program so that this postgraduate program will become sort of research entity in collaboration with companies and corporations, Toyota or Disney, or even we can address the issue of the cities with public entities. We reached out to the other country and started to do the international exchanges. And of course, you know, we are very much excited about more collaboration with many industries. But the problem here is, even though we want to expand this, and I realize that the system of the school really doesn't let us do more intensive research in collaboration with the corporations, because one, UCLA's case, we have a quarter system, and every quarter professor will be changed. Even for the postgraduate program, we just started the studio system called Super Studio, so that the one professor teaches one entire year with the graduate students with already the first degree, so that at least we can keep this research platform for a year. But if you look into the other field, like engineering or the medical school, they have more sort of a sustainable sort of a way to continue the research. And since architecture is really facing the big change, from like a technology advancement and globalization and so on, we really need to create this intensive sort of research platform where we can really collaborate with the industry, with the renowned designers, and with the student, and it has to be sustainable. So my question or my ideal program will be the way to kind of sustain this platform for much longer term, and that requires maybe the change of the way we actually organize the curriculum and how to run the school. And right now, we don't know that. But if that happens, maybe it will become like a sort of a spaceship, sort of, so that the research and the education can come together, and we can just go out to the space. So this is my hope. Thank you.
Okay, so standing in for Monica Ponce de Leon is her fair-haired counterpart, Judith Kennard, who is our current president of ACSA and faculty member at Tulane.
Well, what I wanted to talk about, at least briefly, just to introduce the topic, this came up at the discussion on integrated practice recently. I think it was Leslie that talked about the fear that we all face as we think about adjusting our curricula in any kind of profound way, because it is an enormously difficult thing. But I think as we look at our educational settings and how we are preparing students, I think we're preparing students in many instances to work in settings, literal settings like this. This is the office of a former student of mine. I think you can see Adam Urinsky sort of peering his head above the datum of computers and files. And, I think it looks pretty much like the way most contemporary architectural offices work. There are computers, there are people sitting in front of the computers, there are lots of binders and information, and there are probably a lot of people with earphones on and listening to whatever music they enjoy. So the question is, what prepares, of course we all understand that the work that goes on in a place like that is pretty diverse, pretty rich, and engages a broad number of aspects of what we might consider a sort of a comprehensive practice of architecture. But the big question that I have, and I think many of us are probably thinking this, is this still the core setting, the fundamental place where students need to be spending their time exploring with the tools that they have at hand? The studio, obviously the center of our conceptual understanding of architectural education, crucial, vital to us. If we experiment, do we give up what's great about the studio setting, which I think we've all been nurtured in? This particular image, I think the only digital, I guess there's a laptop on the table amongst the cardboard. But the notion of the architecture studio as being central, I think, is something that perhaps does need to be challenged without necessarily giving it up. I think we often hear discussions about how other professional disciplines prepare people for that profession. Certainly the settings in which their core settings are different than ours. The top image is clearly an early example of hospital rounding, where the series of students and the lead educators, the experienced physicians, bring people from bed to bed, and you learn quite literally in the practice setting. Law school, as we all know, is a very, very different model. The library is the core setting of the law school, and the distance between law education and law profession could not be more profound. There's no sense that there needs to be any kind of, Judith Wegner can correct me on this later, but any kind of intense practicum associated with legal education. And not in any particular sense that the educators need to be practitioners. They need to be good at teaching law. They do not need to be good at practicing law. And I think it's a very different world. So yesterday when I offered my thought that if we could make one small change to architectural education, architectural schools and their great diversity, from 5-year programs in rural settings to purely graduate programs in urban settings to programs that have enormous resources and programs that are struggling. I think if I could make one change, it's the recognition that you need to move, that each student needs to move outside the design studio, at least for part of their educational experience. And that will be different for some schools than for others, for some students than for others. So it's perhaps naive on my part to think that encouraging dual degrees and undergraduate majors and doing everything that you can to get students practicing, developing intensity in something in addition to architecture. It may be naive to me to think that that's possible. Francis Burnett suggested that it, in a sense, implies that architecture is weak. And I certainly would not want to begin to imply that. However, I think we need to expand the settings. We need to have specializations. We need to have generalizations. We need to be able to talk to people outside of our discipline. We need to have students that are, we all talk about critical thinking. I'm not so sure we're great at teaching it in some settings. So I'm going to end with this image, which of course is a 3-ring circus, which I think is perhaps a better analogy than Crown Hall when you think about the worlds and the different settings that our students will be engaging, that our schools are like, that our faculty, the work of each of us operates in very different places, and both intellectually and literally. But the 3-ring circus is perhaps an apt analogy at a variety of levels. You know, but one thing is probably clear. Not all schools will have elephants. You know, elephants are expensive, and some circuses have them and some don't. Some schools have robots and some won't. And yet, we need to encourage the diversity, the simultaneity, and the variety, and certainly preserve the intensity. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. Our next presenter is Javier Quintana. He was the host of this conference that we had in Madrid and Segovia that was so fine, and he is director of the IE School of Architecture in Madrid and Segovia, which is why we were there. Javier blends together academic commitment with an established professional career in the field of architecture. He has a master's in advanced architectural design from Columbia, New York, and a PhD in architecture from the University of Navarra, where his doctoral thesis won the Extraordinary Prize. He has subsequently worked as professor of design at University of Navarra and as design juror in other Spanish and international institutions. As I said, he's dean of IE School of Architecture and Design and director of the Fundación Rafael Escuela, an institution which promotes professional excellence through research in the architecture and engineering realms. So help me to welcome him from Spain.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Norman. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Donna. And thank you, Michael Monti. It's a privilege to be here. Thank you very much for inviting us. I have 8 minutes, but since I think I'm here because we are kind of oh, now you're setting the clock. You may have forgotten about it. I think I feel forced, even if I'm going to talk about the IE dreams, the IE School of Architecture dreams, I need to give you some background on who we are, because since we are really a newcomer in the world of architectural education, I think before putting those dreams in front of you, I have to give you a little bit of who is our mother, because we're the daughter school of a business school, IE Business School, based in Madrid. a 45 years old institution, still a young mother, very global, based in Madrid, but with activity in all continents at this point, 80 nationalities on campus, and consistently ranked top 5 in Europe, top 10 in the world. The business school runs 33 programs, and what is more important, the focus of this business school is on entrepreneurship. And since architects, most of us are entrepreneurs, the business school decided to create a school of architecture 5 years ago, which I think it's got a very peculiar profile that I want to share with you today. Obviously, we're a baby school, only 4 years in activity at this point, but a school that was, it's a newborn, start from scratch, no heritage. As Martha Thorne likes to say, who's the Associate Dean for External Relations of the school, we're babies but not juniors at the same time. So we were born in the crisis, and we were inheriting a culture of professional practice from the business school. We're driven, innovative, and one of the challenges was to fill some of the gaps in architectural education. Certainly, also, we want to contribute to the redefinition of the role of the architect in society. So when we started the school, we had some thoughts. We did some research. And after, this research, we had some conclusions. I'm going to share them with you. First is that we think that architecture is a diverse discipline. It's really rich, a lot of professionals involved, a lot of different people of society. But it seems to me that schools of architecture in general, I don't want to point anybody, but in general, because not all of them are doing that, are more closed in mind that what architecture is. I would say that schools of architecture are too much about architects, and architecture goes beyond that. And I feel in a way that we're putting our discipline or our education kind of in a cage, and there's many more possibilities beyond that. And if there's something that we had clear at the beginning is that whatever we were creating had to be beyond architecture. Of course, it's about architects and about architecture, but had to be there. Still, based in design, driven by innovation, and of course, inheriting the management culture of the business school, trying to do something about it, and trying to make stronger architects that can fight, the difficult times out there. Our DNA, I think we said, based in entrepreneurship, we are very concerned that given the fact that 70% of us, start companies, there's nothing in the curriculum of schools of architecture that seriously address that. And well, one of the things we created is what we call the IE module, which was our first dream, which is, to try to teach architects some teamwork, negotiation, presentation, startup culture, personal branding, things that have been taught in my school from the first year. And surprise, surprise, they're being reviewed even better than Design Studio at this point. And we're design-oriented still, okay? But this is happening already. Our positioning, as I said, we're trying to fill the gap, between practice and education. There's been a lot of discussions about this during this weekend, and I think all of them probably are true. What we're trying is to bring, some of the good things of practice into education. But also we're trying to educate some of the professionals, and that's something that I'll get into that later. Anyhow, regarding this, something that we're experiencing at this point, we are, with the help of online education, we are allowing our students in second semester, all second semesters, to work in 55 international destinations. So our aim is people have 2 years of experience by the time they graduate. They work part-time, the rest of the time they have online education. The first month of the second semester is face-to-face, in any case, where, where professors introduce their subjects and issues that they will have to deal with. Our mission, I think we cannot avoid this. This is crisis time. Maybe it's not so bad here. It's still an 80%, of unemployment in the construction sector. It's ridiculously bad in Europe and all over the place. I guess Asia is the only place where it's not. And we cannot avoid that. At least we can, we should discuss a little bit about that. At least in our school, we thought that, having the chance to teach a little bit of management, a little bit of how to survive through the crisis, we started creating programs like the Master in Architectural Management and Design, where students that are designers, all of them, we're giving them the chance to analyze the business implications of design decisions. That would be the headline of that program. One other thing, and this I think it's a very important one. Once you're 35, there's no chance to find more education anymore, unless you go to the professional associations. But I'm not talking about that. That's serious education. Programs that could, recall what we had in the academy when we were in the undergrad. There's not really that many chances. And luckily, there's a world, that is empty, and I'm talking, about the tip of this pyramid. You can find anybody doing, undergrad, then masters, but then what is happening beyond that? There's a gap there to be filled. Harvard is already started with that. USC is doing that, but really, that's really, really a grain in the desert. And we, at least in our school, we're trying to invert the shape of the pyramid and trying to create programs that are interesting for professionals or for someone that really wants to go back to academy, but mostly professionals, through an executive education set of short programs and also 1-year-long programs, again with the help of online education. Talking about format, and I get again to the online. I know that it's like slaughtering a sacred cow, but I don't know if you're aware that, for example, Stanford Engineering, the department, is now teaching online courses, and there's one of them on artificial intelligence. By the way, they're free and they're very interesting, with 100,000 students. Well, I'm not implying that, that this should get this massified, but we, again, should think about it, that, a distance learning can provide, a little bit of flexibility. So this is what we're trying to do at school, combining all our programs are blended, giving us the chance to be 24/7, and, allowing professionals to be educated at the same time they're working. One last comment. We also very concerned about the student profile. There's, given this diversity, there's so many different professionals and people that could be interested and that they actually have a role in the design decision process in architecture that we cannot reach, but I think we should reach them. So I think one of the challenges is to make our schools more diverse in that sense, to change a little bit of the student profile. And then especially if you think about this, and this is what I call the scary map of architectural education, where it shows the business of education at the master's level in the US and the UK, and it gives you an idea that architecture is not even 1%, it's 0.9. And what happens? I mean, the 50% of the gross domestic product of most countries, in what regards, it's about construction. But then the education is not even 1%. There's a huge gap there. Shouldn't we do something about it? What does that mean? I think it means that we're just teaching the tip, we're educating the tip of the iceberg. And there's so many other opportunities to teach other people that are really, crucial in the design process. I'm going to give you examples that we're doing now. For example, we're teaching the management team of the Dutch bank ING. They consider themselves a very urban bank. They want to know about the evolution of the city. So we created a city seminar series where they start to understand what's the evolution of the metropolis and what these things that they read in the paper, and that's fun actually. We're also 2 minutes. we're also teaching design thinking to MBAs, and that's been real fun also. We're teaching, you know, nonlinear thinking, intuition, creativity to people that at the end, you know, they may end up being the ones making the decisions about architecture, because they will be probably, you know, heading to the top of the companies, the ones that are commissioning the buildings, the ones. So it's fun to, you know, to bring design culture outside. And well, that's what we're doing. Another example, we're partnering with Brown University with an MBA that is merging MBA culture and arts and humanities. It's kind of a fine arts MBA kind of, which has got 23 students, which has been kind of an experiment, but it's been fun, and we're providing the part on creativity of that program. If there's a final thought to this, in talking about, you know, the blue sky, the future, where the kites are going, from our point of view, when we analyze, you know, the world of architectural education, it seems to us that we're all kind of moving in the same fish tank, more or less constrained in the same limits, and that there's a whole world outside where, you know, there's a lot of you know, opportunities, and also there's a lot of needs. It's not just an opportunity thing. There are needs out there. And well, I guess there's some institutions that should jump, and at least IE is trying to jump there. Thank you.
Thanks, Javier. Our next presenter will be Preston Scott Cohen, who you know is Chair of Architecture at the Graduate School of Design at Harvard and the Gerald M. McHugh Professor at GSD. He has a practice doing houses, cultural institutions, and many other things that are all off script. Scott.
I don't have any slides. Thinking about the topic. The curriculum that I teach is the first semester at the GSD, and it involves obsessive and peculiar problems which go to the heart of what I regard to be the most important matters of architectural thought, ultimately. In fact, I think the first semester is most deeply embedded in the advancement of architectural thought of any of the semesters. So I thought, well, but why can't this go on? And I have to say, by the way, that it's been observed that, you know, the work that comes out of it is so inventive and exciting, and it sort of gets diffuse and diluted as time goes on. It seemed to me that looking at that, it was clear that we had to address many broader issues, and that those are why it would, you know, have to change as we proceed through what we call our core. There's a kind of revival of the idea of the first semester after our core, when people can take what are called option studios, and individual professors can teach whatever they would like, and it's a very ad hoc, not organized curriculum. At that moment, the students are subjected once again to the power and the authority of an individual. And there's a kind of arbitrariness about all of this, as you know. The curriculum that I would like to teach, the curriculum that all those option studio critics would like to teach. How to resolve this? It dawned on me that after the first year, you know, a lot of the students are actually quite capable, quite empowered by all of it they are able to do, and that later in our careers we're in similar positions that they find themselves in at that point relative to certain projects we're undertaking on a very personal level. And I thought, what would happen, you know, if we just change the structure considerably, or introduce a new system, an alternative, maybe it would run parallel to the one we have now, where one would remain a student forever. Basically, what would happen is that after maybe the first year, you know, you would go directly into profession, into the practice. There would be a system of masters, of teachers, who are in practice and in the academy. Well, the academy is sort of not really the way it is now exactly. I don't know how it would be configured, but somehow these professors would be brought to individuals after any number of years, periodically throughout their career. So let's say, for example, at some point in your career, you know, a project comes to you, a commission for something, a school, and at this particular point, coincidentally, you are appointed, a master. You would have to engage this individual in the development of the ideas of the project. In other words, the curriculum would be defined by society, by the commissions that it offers, by the various plans that it needs realized, whatever they may be, and the pedagogy would be developed in relationship with these masters. Who are these masters? They are others who are practicing. They would have to be actually voted in by you and others, and all of us would also be able to become one. In this particular system, one would move in and out of being a master or a student of a master, a producer of buildings, and one who teaches one to think about them. We would have to bring in, of course, the theorists and the historians. They would have to be central players in this. That would complicate it logistically, obviously, but the whole point of all of this imagining was that somehow we need to, of course, think of a much more fluid relationship between practice and the academy, one where architecture moves into the world. I'm listening to most of what is happening in the discussion, and it seems we're talking about always getting outside of our cage or, bringing everything else in. Actually, I think we need to move out into it more so. I think the problem when I imagine myself in practice without the academy is that it's a very isolated experience. And then when I'm in the academy, I feel imprisoned by its protocols, by its habits. There's got to be some way to reconceive that relationship. I love the idea of everyone being on trial all the time. Imagine if you were in practice and now and then had to accommodate a kind of theoretical question that was being brought to bear by someone known as a master of thinking about architecture, or a professor, and an historian and a theorist, and they would raise the stakes of your work, and you would have to return to those moments of youth and naive understanding of what really matters about architecture. You'd have to bring those things to bear again. It wouldn't just be the limitations and constraints of the project that motivate everything, but something else really profound that's sort of removed from all of that. That really was all I had on my mind as I thought through this problem. It's just the beginning of a conversation completely born in a naive conception of what would be possible if anything was possible. Okay, thank you.
Now we have Barbara Bestor, who is the Julius Schulman Distinguished Professor in Practice at Woodbury University and Principal of Bestor Architecture, a Los Angeles-based modern architecture firm. The office is collaborative and produces design that navigates between popular culture, art, and architecture. Barbara is a graduate of Harvard College, attended the AA, and has an MArch from SciArc. She has taught at UCLA, SciArc, and Harvard, and chairs the new Woodbury Graduate Architecture Program in its first 2 years. I should have used past tense. She is the author of Bohemian Modern, Living in Silver Lake, for which we are all quite envious. And her built work has been published and exhibited in a wide range of media. Thanks for joining us, Barbara.
Thank you very much. I would like to start with an allegorical tale from underground Los Angeles, namely the discovery of oil and the ensuing blast of money at the start of the 20th century that triggered the Wild West growth of this city. Eventually, the oil production went from an everyman for himself model to a slightly more consolidated group of companies. But most importantly, eventually the oil was mostly pumped out. Once the large pools of easy access black oil were gone, the oil companies shut down their rigs and went off to other parts of the globe where new super pools were there to be tapped. But then, interestingly, towards the end of the 20th century, oil prices went up quite a lot. And several smaller oil companies came back to LA, drilling with new, deeper pipes, using more sophisticated equipment to slurp up all the hard-to-get stuff. And they started to make a very decent profit on what are basically the little pools of oil, the leftovers. To recap, when the big pools, or the untouched vast reserves, are no longer available, it may make sense to look at the small pools again. I would like to propose that this sort of 2.0 entrepreneurial truffle hunting activity is what we may need to be teaching our students. In architecture, the 20th century business of architecture has been defined by large-scale projects that follow in lockstep with the opportunistic travels of global capital. Big oil-rich building boom in the Middle East in the 70s, the Architects Collaborative and SOM are there. Big building boom in China today, well, everybody big is there. Since the 1950s, the big firms and big capital have worked hard to project an aura of stability, of opportunity, and of solid long-term growth. Some of our best students flock to these jobs through established pipelines we have set up in our own schools. I would argue, though, that since 2008, that stable image has been found to be suspect. The global giant pool of money, as American Life calls it, though large and powerful, is an unstable entity given to unpredictable spasms and bad speculations, and the large sector of the architectural profession that has tied itself so closely has been burned badly and is legitimately somewhat fearful of what comes next. As Darren Petrucci illustrated yesterday, other disciplines have simultaneously been eroding the scope of what architects actually can get paid to do in large-scale projects. Architectural education has been training students to participate in this large-scale global practice of architecture, and perhaps the increasingly technocratic micro-specialization of skills that we demand of our students has been playing into that a little too much. To quote a young designer in my office, a recent GSD grad, all of my friends in New York are at SOM. My blue sky curriculum is one that trains students to seek out the smaller local pools of capital in order to fund the reimagination of our world and culture. I think we need to train students to use their imaginations to embark on architecture and design practices that are not dependent on big capital. Some capital is necessary, of course, but that actually exists in all sorts of small pockets in the US as well as other markets. Witness LA's own homegrown firms, or homegrown large firms, Gary and Morphosis. They started out as experimental small shops with groundbreaking work that developed all sorts of original ideas locally in smaller pools and then broke through to become giant global brands. Finding architectural opportunities and exploiting them using advanced technological skills and creative problem-solving abilities to make new things. This is what we ought to be teaching our students, despite its apparent difficulties and the retooling required on our part as teachers. Well, I don't know what happened to that, but I have a thought experiment for this class, for this audience. Whoops. Imagine that you are not the head of a school of architecture, but rather the head of a school of the culinary arts. In the last 20 years, the field of the plastic arts that has had the most radical transformation is gastronomy. Food is, in case you hadn't heard, the new rock and roll. Food is popular culture with TV shows, celebrity chefs, magazines, famous critics, and a critical mass of the younger generation's rapt attention. If you were running such a school, your graduates might go out and choose to open a food truck, grow rare herbs in order to create medieval recipes for liqueurs long since forgotten, apprentice themselves to a 5-star chef in Napa, bake donuts, make chemical explosions in a lab with salmon roe, invent organic and edible glues, etc., etc. Your students might look towards mentors such as the AA-trained architect-turned-chef Fergus Henderson, who more or less invented the nose-to-tail movement and foments revolution from his St. John's Empire in London. Or your scientifically minded students might take up molecular gastronomy and apprentice themselves to Ferran Adria. The amount of possibilities for your putative graduates is staggering and actually sort of fun. There is no longer a snobby French hierarchical tradition running the show. There are few color barriers, and even class barriers seem to have fallen away in the popular culture of food. My question is, why can't we have that? Has architecture cut itself off from the mainstream, from the popular, from pleasure, from materiality? We certainly didn't start out as such a straight-laced professionalist profession. The early Bauhaus was co-ed with loose design and art experiments that integrated multiple scales and design types in an education that was very freeing. That trajectory was sort of shut down when architecture took over the school. The soft architecture machines project, with its sociological impulse at MIT, was banished from architecture and went on to become the Media Lab and basically the software industry. Experiments in architecture are what drew me and many of my peers to LA as students. The remarkable messiness and joie de vivre of Schindler with his station wagon full of 2x4s, or Frank Gehry redeploying the banal to kick off the LA school. We are still a world center of experimental design, but even here, there seems to be a serious detachment between the insular world of students' work and the vibrant cultural milieu around them. Curricularly speaking, I don't have a formal shortlist, but in our new graduate program at Woodbury, we have a track of coursework called Alternative Practice and Entrepreneurship, and it's resulting in new thesis projects that engage directly with real stuff. Our program focuses on fieldwork with mandatory classes where all students get away from their computers, get out in the world, and see and discuss buildings, infrastructure, and urbanism in Los Angeles. It's sort of a tourist shot, but whatever. There are also required fieldwork studios in foreign cities and rural areas where students are embedded for a month or so to study architecture and urban culture in another context. The goal is, and this perhaps repeats Javier's thing, is to get students through and beyond the stance of the critical observer into active participation and engagement with any culture they inhabit. In the panels yesterday and in the conversations around them, I saw some like-minded curricular examples. In Michael Speaks' super local and super global Kentucky studio, they're repurposing the local houseboat industry into low-income, low-carbon footprint housing. In Richard Summers' initiative at UT, he's brought in Toronto entrepreneur Lauren Gertner to co-teach architecture and entrepreneurship and coach students in their own design product initiatives. My note here says multiple slides of fun stuff by architects, so we'll do that here now. I think the fun that we were all looking for yesterday might be found in these sorts of projects where architects are embracing the experimental and utopian impulse at the roots of our profession and getting looser with their disciplinary boundaries, flirting with branding, with commercial culture, and embracing our potential for remaking the worlds we live in and what they look like. The truffle hunters, I guess. We are, after all, cultural producers. We just have to live up to the title. The slides kind of carry on here. So there. Thanks.
Thanks, Barbara. Now we have William Williams. He is an architect and director of the School of Architecture and Interior Design at the University of Cincinnati's College of Design, Art, Architecture, and Planning, otherwise known as DAAP, maybe. Or is that DAP?
It is DAP.
Oh, it is? Oh. Prior to his appointment at UC, William was associate professor at the University of Virginia and has previously taught at Rice University, UCLA, and UC Berkeley. In the mid-90s, he formed WPA with Archie Pizzini, and his projects include the renovation of the historic El Dorado Ballroom in Houston, the Flip Flop House, an affordable house design, and the Oakland Community United Church of Christ, which involved coordinating over 500 volunteers and all donated materials to convert Butler building
An old Butler building.
into a church and school. Told you, I don't have a lot of light here. So he's worked in a variety of trajectories and a variety of scales, and holds a Bachelor of Architecture from University of Houston and his master's from Harvard GSD. Welcome, William.
Thank you. I thought about this. This is kind of a tough question. It seems easy at first, and the more you think about it, the more difficult it becomes. And I realized the reason it was so difficult for me is because, as any administrator, you start to wear a lot of different hats. Some days I think of myself as serving the profession, And so that was a kind of different blue sky curricula. Some days I'm thinking about serving the discipline, some days society at large, and occasionally I even think about how we're serving our students. And there is really also a difference, I believe, between undergraduate education, graduate education, and even post-professional education, where in some ways, part of it because of my critique of high schools, but undergraduate education has become not remedial, but it's basically we're talking about the world as it is right now. In graduate education, we're starting to focus much more on the world as we hope it to or expect it to be. And post-professional or advanced research is much more about maybe the world as it ought to be. And so there's so many different schools and so many different focuses, and you have to think about which of those sort of constituencies you serve, that it was hard to come up with a singular thing. So one of the things I wanted to do, because I've been listening to a lot of conversations and they seem to me either being professionally or disciplinary focused, was go back and actually show some students. We had a conversation in our school, and place it in context. We are a co-op program. After the first year and a half, all of our students work every other semester. There's no summers off after that first year. And they work in offices all around the world. Only 15% of our co-ops are in the state of Ohio, so we're a very different model for education. So this is one short project inside one quarter at the beginning of their education. It's a few minutes, maybe 4 or 5. And just so we can actually have this conversation in the context of these students, because I think it's important to see what we're working with, because they come from very different backgrounds and very different places. So hopefully this will work. And they're also very young.
I'd say either halfway or thirds, but I feel like thirds is kind of...
At the beginning, Melanie says, Sydney, Matt, go do design.
They need to connect to each other on the sides. We'd have to then...
I like math, but I think that has the greatest possibilities.
It looks cool, so I'm happy with how it's turned out.
You ready? Ready? See space? Inside the space! Outside the space! Inside the space! Outside the space!
The design's great. It's just, I feel like you're stuck on what you have.
Which is why I want you to like...
Yeah,
I don't think we're going to grow less as a section. I don't think we're going to end up hating each other. We have such a good time together. Why not work together?
Mostly it will end in tears and death, though.
I know we're not trying to spend a lot, but I just feel like there's a lot. I don't get why we need so many units.
A lot of people are resistant to like money, and I think people just need to realize this is important.
We're going to do the best and the cheapest thing that's possible. It's not like we're going to spend, we're not going to try to spend as much money to make it good.
What's the difference?
Originally we were talking $145 a person, and a few people got a little freaked out.
And then, they changed their design to meet the cost, which I think was very good.
Right.
Okay, so these are third scale right now.
Yes. So
right.
we can, yes. We have 100. Did you hear that? 100 little sketch models, which means 1,200 pieces. And, like just sitting there cutting with everyone and seeing everyone being productive, it really helps us all get passionate that we're all, working towards the same goal. And it's kind of like a nice little thing.
I just got really, really, really happy because this problem that we've been having for like 4 days, Matt figured out.
And we think we have something that works, and people understand it, which is good.
Let's just say that this is very intriguing.
The hardest part is designing what to do. Now we're just to be busy work stage. I'm treasurer, even though I have a negative $133 in my bank account right now.
It's gonna end up being 2 payments.
Hey, Chingwan.
One for the wood is gonna be a check, and the second one is gonna be for the glue, the stain, the everything, and that's gonna be cash. Right now, we just decided on getting these 2x4s with all these knots. So we're at Home Depot. Their 2x4s look like they got dipped in cotton candy.
Here we are at Lowe's.
Woo! And we found a discounted wood that's also 2x4, but it's a higher grade.
I want these.
Yeah.
Pretty much, we made some pretty decent friends over at Lowe's.
How much are we buying right now?
$138.
2x4s.
Look at all that wood in that car.
The theme of our unit is like honesty. 1 2x4 makes 1 unit, so it's kind of a transformation from the material into the unit. We are at full speed ahead right now.
I've been doing a lot of the cutting down in the workshop. A lot of the man work. I came up with the schematics on what to cut, on like how to cut it.
The woodshop people have my heart right now. Their craft is almost perfect. Gluing.
Look how many we had to fix.
What do you mean fix? What's wrong with
Most of it is poor gluing.
Yeah, we really need to focus on craft.
Gluing them together is going to be the biggest issue because you have to hand hold each piece of wood for like 30 minutes.
And gluing and cutting and gluing and sanding. It's been a long day.
I definitely want to make sure I pull my weight more than anything.
Trying to make up for any lackadaisical days in the studio that I have. A lot of people aren't showing up.
And this is our final project, and your job is to come in and work.
You signed up for a job, come in and do your job. Because in my opinion, there's some people who are working way too hard on this, and there are other people who are completely slacking.
People said a lot about how they felt.
We're all on the same page. I would really like to comment on the fact that we are all getting along and working together so well.
Individual commitment to a group effort, that is what makes a team work, a company work, a society work, and a civilization work, as well as a studio work.
I think we really need to focus on our finding construction that really brings value to the unit.
We have some rings set up that we're gonna set up in a line that kind of creates a curve.
If there were any construction ideas that required too much forcing of the unit, then we just kind of scrapped them because we wanted to take something that was more natural.
We're almost done.
That's so far out.
Yep. It's a sad
Yeah, that's like almost out.
All right. Now, there are a few reasons. I mean, aside from the, there's lots of issues with this thing. Aside from some sort of reinforcing of gender roles, is something that we always have to work on. And the unfortunate lack of any ethnic diversity, which is an institutional problem that we have at the school. The video, in a lot of ways, reflects why the idea of public education is such a revolutionary idea, and also, quite frankly, why it's needed. And so part of this, as I was listening to the conversation, I was trying to place it back in the context of what we're working with, who we're talking about, and who are we exposing to in terms of these ideas. And that studio then is reflective of people who are their first generation coming to school. And this is a big investment for them, a big risk. But there are also people in the studio who both their parents are architects. And this is really, in some ways, just a rite of passage. They have a kind of predestined future. And there's even students who probably saw one of our students on Project Runway, and the applications go up after that, and then they really wanted to be in fashion. Their parents wouldn't let them, so they come into an interior design program because that's as close as they can get to it. And there's people like me. I came into college on a track scholarship. There's a whole variety of people that we're talking about. So if you believe the sort of W.B. Yeats quote, that education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire, I was trying to figure out what is it we should do for the curricula. So quickly, I have just 3 things that I would do in a blue sky curriculum based on what we saw. I think it was Lonnie Guinier, I'm not sure, but she talks about in diversity. I know Stephen Lewis said not to use that word, the D word. But one of the things she describes is a situation where you have 3 different students. Student A takes a test and gets, let's say, 8 out of the 10 questions correct. Student B gets 6 out of the 10 questions correct, and student C gets only 2 out of the 10 questions correct. The way we're thinking about in society, you take students A and B. But she posited, what if, in fact, student C got the 2 answers correct that A and B did not? And wouldn't it make more sense, actually, to put A and C or B and C together? Therefore, you had a team which got everything right. So in my blue sky curriculum, I actually want to do a little bit of class building to build the kind of team to do these collective exercises. And I think that you see some of that reflected in terms of what they learned going through this process of working on this stuff together. Each of them kind of finds their way of working in this team. So the team building would be the second thing. And the last thing is really kind of a lot closer to what Scott was talking about in the sense of an individuated curriculum. I mean, if I could do whatever I wanted, I would just sit down with each student and talk about what they need. I don't know why the student who both of their parents are architects and he's grown up around this whole life would take the exact same curriculum as someone whose parents have never been to college, never thought about architecture, didn't even know what it was. Maybe one person needs to learn to draw better. Maybe another person needs to take more physics or more structures, or maybe they need to read more. So if I could have an individuated curriculum, I think that's, how I would set it up. So again, I just wanted to come back and place that in the context of the video. In some ways, that video is a little embarrassing, but a lot of us, that's what we're talking about. When we're moving around these diagrams and boxes, that's who we're impacting. Thanks.
Well, great. Now comes the bittersweet moment of a conference when we're in the last lap, and we have a chance to have discussion amongst ourselves about all that we've learned and heard today on the panel and over the course of the days of the conference. So I first want to just thank everybody for participating with this, and all of you for hanging in there with us, and would like to open it up to questions, unless Margaret or Norman have another idea for how the next hour goes. The floor is open for questions. If you need time to think about what your questions are, I'll start the ball rolling as the good moderator I try to be, but any questions?
Or manifestos.
Or manifestos, yeah. Paulo.
I'm slightly troubled by these descriptions of blue skies for one particular reason. And I'll start with food. It's very, the analogy is very suave, very persuasive, very seductive. But there is one major difference, that there are no universities in the world that teach cuisine. There is only one, which has been set up by Slow Food. Gastronomy never needed to be part of a university institution, whereas architectural schools are. And in my idea of a university fulfills two functions. One is through schools imparting knowledge, and the other one is generating knowledge, which is not normally done through schools. It's done through, for instance, departments, at least in Europe, through the 20th century. And here, it seems that other than one person, none of the others have actually touched on research. If schools are simply about educating future architects to become architects, so to approximate practice as much as possible, why they should be in universities?
That's why I actually talked about the difference between undergraduate education, difference between different institutions. For instance, I really do believe I would have and we do have a very fundamentally different approach in regards to research at the graduate level as opposed to the undergraduate level. And I do believe, fortunately, that research at the graduate level impacts and influences the undergraduate level, but in some ways, there are different curricular structures. That can be debated, and we have that debate all the time. But partly it's because of our uniqueness and having to prepare students to go out in the world and work in 1.5 years in an office, that we're into this highly accelerated thing. So we're in a kind of unique position. But even what we're showing you, the idea of taking part of the year out to do that as a project when they're supposed to go work at in a corporate office, less than a year later, is not something that goes without discussion or debate. So I believe in research. The question is, where do you do it? Which schools do it? Does every school do the exact same thing? And I think that answer is probably no.
I'm sure it's no. I mean, the hard facts are that not every school does research, and that's okay. But Scott, your school does research.
Absolutely. I was just taking for granted that all of this would happen in the context of an ongoing dialogue with the university. Maybe I didn't say it. This was actually what was fundamental to the whole conception of what I was thinking. I think I mentioned that, of course, historians and theorists would have to be involved in any kind of ongoing, collaboration between practice and the academy, in my mind, because they would be those who bring knowledge, knowledge of the field. As far as research and design, it's a very difficult thing to speak to. I think the word is being misused and misapplied by many designers just to make themselves relevant at the university, when in fact we know that actually only the historians and theorists are doing the kind of research that would be regarded as research. in that context. The technology people are usually in the architecture schools applying research. They're not doing original research. So we are in a precarious position, obviously. I mean, we're obviously on the fringes in the university context. You know, we're well aware of it, and of course, constantly looking for the means to generate topics of research that are legitimate in that context. Difficult. I think the professional school is in the weakest position of all of the parts of the GSD with respect to your question, actually.
And I would just say that not all schools are within research universities, and that I think Richard Summers was talking to this yesterday, that in a sense that proximity has sort of forced, it's a little bit of like a Cinderella slipper issue where architects are forced to describe their work in kind of perhaps often more scientific and academic terms than necessarily what they're doing. So my point with food wasn't, we should be opening culinary academies, but that freedom of possibility of kinds of work, kinds of research, and experimentalism is something that has gotten weeded out more and more. I think partially the pressure of firms, but maybe also the pressure of what's required in tenure review at a research university. I've been on so many faculty searches with people presenting their research, which just isn't anything like what it might be if they were coming to me in sort of a graduate programs in chemistry or medicine or even English.
Go ahead.
Okay. No, just one thing. When you have just 8 minutes to talk, usually the discourse becomes just headlines. So it's not that we don't believe in. I think most of us are fully convinced that research is an important part of the curriculum. My point here, when we made a reflection, since we are such young institutions, that we realized that before there was the standard courses and the standard teaching methodologies, and then research was something apart, and then the methodology of research has been brought into all the other subjects. I mean, I think every professor at this point could affirm that, say, my students are researching on this, on that. So there's been like a transfer of the research activity of what R&D used to be into what's the normal activity in the classroom. I think that it's something that is happening all over the place. It is happening for sure in the United States, at least this is my experience, as opposed to Europe, being a European. And I know you mentioned the departments, but I think that in this situation, I think that what departments are supposed to do has to be redefined also.
Just, our chancellor always insists that the UCLA is a research university, right? And since I came here, I really realized that the facility and also the program in the United States is not really tuned to do the research in the architectural department. It's very difficult. It allows particular kind of research, but for instance, in Japan, you have a facility to test a new structure. You just can crash it and so on. We don't have it. Maybe, I don't know if there's any sort of university which has those kind of funding and a facility to initiate the actual, more like a sort of a scientific research around the new technology. I would like to, maybe MIT. And so in order to do that, we have a different mechanism. And also who do the research is a big question. Faculty or practitioner, yes, they should be involved, but also we need a mechanism so that, like a medical school, somebody in a program get the credit for doing research, not just being taught, but to really pursue the new knowledge. And I think nowadays I really see that because of the financial difficulty, many corporations are very interested in investing sort of money to really actually find a new vision, like a car company or the sort of a solar panel company. They can't really do the research about those technologies, but they can really actually put them together to really emerging, for instance, city and how this technology can influence the city. So there's an opportunity to pursue that, but from my experience in UCLA, again, 1 year is possible, but multiple years of research with research team is a little bit difficult. And that's why actually it's very difficult to talk about the research in a way maybe European can do or the Japanese, some of the Japanese university can do.
In some ways, I think we have to disaggregate these things. For instance, there's an issue of having the infrastructure for research. Many of us don't necessarily have it of that type, although I think, you see we're doing a lot of research in terms of the humanities, history, theory, research. But the other question is, and the reason, again, I wanted to show those students in action is, how do you take those students and actually give them the tools they need to do research? And that, to me, is the curricular question. I mean, otherwise, what are the methods? How do you actually convey that? How do you prepare them to do research? Not curricularly structure research, because in that way it would actually be much more limiting. That would actually be giving them a pail, as opposed to actually setting them free. And so the question is, how do you provide the curricula the tools that they need to do that? And I think, in some ways, I think that we are doing it, both at the undergraduate and graduate level. There's someone else.
Yes. Okay. Over there and then back there.
So on one side we have cuisine, right? And on the other side we have nutrition. But I think the thinking that connects them is not a dichotomy. It's a false dichotomy to separate the two. Both are kind of a vision, both are kind of an ideal. And so we have, from the earlier discussion, we have kind of fuzzy intentions, which are great. What I think we need are more discrete, and this maybe favors what William is saying, more discrete tactics and things that we can objectify, frameworks we can give students to help them make that connection. Because saying that there's this opposition between, no, I believe in really tasty food and I believe in really healthy food, I think gets us nowheres. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that our architecture schools have very long been contorted by the demands of research universities. I don't know, I'm sure all of you have had the experience, maybe you even personally, or experience with many of your colleagues who are fundamentally designers trying to get through a tenure process and becoming extremely contorted and uncomfortable in the process of that because research, as the university defines it, is not really what they like to do or what they do best. So while there are many new opportunities that people are talking about to increase research opportunities to try to keep up with the university demands, I'm actually very, very excited by something that I think is starting to happen. It's not that new, but it seems to be really taking off now, is that all those other disciplines which raise lots of money with research grants, like engineering and business and so on, they're actually now looking to us to teach them about design and design thinking skills. And so in a way I would like to just turn this around to say, I wonder if we in fact need to, in unnatural ways, keep chasing those demands of the university, or if we can in fact stand, let's say, proudly on what we do well, and turn that back as our gift to the university. We will never be the departments that have the largest grants. Forget about it. So what is our contribution to the university? I think we have a pretty big one to make. And they do too now. That's what's, I think, somewhat new. So thank you.
Well, one of the themes that I heard across all of these presentations was the one of empowerment. There is a question in the back. Okay.
I just wanted to point out another value of the proposal that broadens the education to include clients, because this is a tremendous way to create jobs for architects down the line. So it seems that the more people who are reached by architectural education or pieces of it like design thinking, the broader the base of the people who will appreciate and hire the architects ultimately, and probably broaden the settings that the graduates will be hired into. So it seems like a very sustainable model for architectural education, instead of just spreading the word to architects and letting them go out and fight the battle. It seems like it's really setting the scene for the architecture to unfold.
That was the other point I was going to bring up too, Maddie, is another common theme is about bringing the outside in and the widening of perspective. And what Leslie was just talking about does raise another option of bringing the inside out within the context of the university. And maybe I missed it. I haven't heard much about that from any of us. And I'm wondering if who is teaching Design 101. You are? Mm-hmm. For the other departments?
Totally to non-majors.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. That's what I mean.
Very first offering, and I'm new at the university, so I have no reputation on the university. The class of 190 seats filled immediately, and it's completely with non-majors. So there's a demand there for them.
Mm-hmm. Richard?
I want to come back to something William just said around this question of what constitutes research and what I think he was starting to articulate in this is it a studio? The workshop, the studio workshop.
Which to my mind is a way, what you showed what the students were doing was a way of modeling practice, or modeling a kind of interdisciplinary or kind of collaborative practice, which is really what the studio was invented to do, which is to take the system of apprenticeship that existed outside and institutionalize it. So, but I still would have the question, if we can agree that part of the studio should be devoted to modeling practice, whatever that should be in the contemporary time, what role does research play in that? Because research is supposed to actually be advancing our thinking in the field from a technological and other standpoint. And so then the question is, what are the metrics and information those students are operating with? What are the values and ideas that are given to collaborate around, right? And that is what research is actually supposed to do. Because otherwise, where are they drawing their ideas from?
Well, in that particular case, a lot of it had to do, and we actually talked to them, we have them read about this too, but we're actually talking about the idea of a material and a unit and repetition. And we're looking at that in precedents in many design fields, but including architecture. So we talked to them broadly about that. And so that's one of the things that's underlying. It's kind of taken out, edited out of the clip, but they're trying to find a way to make a connection between the material, its dimension, and making, relationship between hand. And again, that's one project, part of one quarter, and there are other studios where we're looking at other things. We might be looking at sort of mid-century modernism, and how does one go about working with mid-century modern buildings, doing additions. So one has a whole level of research, understanding it from a historical perspective, and then of course there's that applied research. So again, it's like I said, it's one part of one quarter of really still is, even in our co-op system, still a 4-year education. But as a collective, as a whole, I think that those things begin to add up. So you really do, even in that context, have to begin to tell stories and narratives and provide research and history for each of those students to make those collaborations important. Otherwise, they're just playing.
Yeah, I'm struck by a couple things. The analogy of the Lego buckets yesterday, the big bucket with all the pieces, and the derision that seemed to be implied about the Harry Potter set or the falling water, and and one was progressive and one was in a way regressive. Both Scott and William talked about the importance of an open-ended or a particularized, a customized education for each particular student, which I'm very attracted to, but in a way sounds a little dated. And then I think the school and IE and its proposition of fairly straightforward package, almost certificates, as a way to particularize the education, which might fall into the category of the Frank Lloyd Wright Lego set. And so I'm trying to see if there's this kind of idea of a prepackaged, very effective, almost precision education which allows people to, in a sense, get a package versus an open-ended question, which is very, never ever particularized, that seem to be presented here, and whether or not that there's any tension between those two in emerging schools, between the kind of trendy things that are going on versus the kind of tradition of almost a Montessori education, which is, everybody has access to everything.
I think that we had Hitoshi turned practice into critical practice as his form morphed. I think our profession, I don't think we should deify research in a traditional way any more than we should deify licensure in our discipline. I think we saw Nathan Miller from MBBJ, who's certainly got a critical practice going on there. If Tom Main's practice isn't critical, I don't know what is. And so I think that one of the things that we have an opportunity to do, and I think what I liked about all of these panels, and Preston Scott Cohen's idea of endless studenthood, implies that research is going on all the time.
Look, just to correct my initial words, I didn't mean that as a criticism, albeit. But in terms of what Norman was saying, is that it is true the MBBJ and Morphosis may have a lot of R&D in there, but if you look at the average architectural practice in America, on average is 0.4% of their total earnings that actually used on R&D activities. If you actually calculate that on the basis of the average earnings of the architectural firm in the US, it's less than $2,000 a year throughout the entire sector.
That's true.
Given that the economic contribution of the construction industry to gross domestic product is between 7 and 14%, architectural services actually contribute to that less than the 1% of the graduate schools. So rather than researching how to make do better, how to learn how to schmooze with developers, I think a lot of research could actually go into understanding how the contribution to the gross domestic product of the construction industry could actually be enhanced by architecture by changing the factors of production. A very Marxist understanding of that, but there is space, labor, materials, equipment. There is no research in architecture that deals with the fundamental factors of production. And if we don't, in a sense, enter that debate, we'll have to keep dealing with the law of diminishing returns and try to learn how to make do with whatever is available.
Well, Paulo, I'm going to agree with you by disagreeing with you, because the panelists that we have up here are not sitting on top of the schools in America that are doing that kind of work, but there are those schools. If I might hazard, however, there is, in my mind, a big difference between the valuation of architectural production in the American university versus the European systems. And I'm hazarding that your school is a product of the British or European systems. In that research is defined differently, and it's what was said before, and I think Norm just said it, the idea of a critical practice in design thinking is given a lot of credence in terms of faculty production, and all of us deans work very hard to convince the university that that is credible production akin to writing 20 engineering papers a year, so I think that this is just a slice out of a very large magpie of different universities with different perspectives, and there are plenty of them that are doing the kind of research that you find compelling, and we all find compelling, but again, it's a question of means. We're all constituted differently.
I think like many of my peers, I came to the conference having dealt with a lot of serious problems economically. and looking for thinking and collaborative ideas and learning what other people are doing to try to get through this period. On the one hand, I think all of us have had budget cuts for 10 years. So the cuts we're getting now are the game-changing cuts. We've cut where we can cut. We've kind of kept the system together. The cuts we're getting now are cuts we can't keep playing the game the same way. So, for example, I just reconfigured my faculty in order to cover the classes and do things we need to do. We have a model with 80% adjuncts from a more traditional structure. And I'm not saying that's bad, but it's a different way to operate than we've done in the past. I heard, in the course of the conference, I've heard a number of discussions, and I think without it being a main topic, I think we're all afraid of an education bubble, suggesting for us that we're close to the point where architectural education costs so much and students and families are in so much debt to put their children through our programs with very bleak prospects of them being able to pay off that education in architectural practice. In other words, you can't pay it off working at Starbucks. So if you can't enter the profession with a reasonable prospect of making a salary to pay off this education, at some point it's not going to be worth families' and kids' investment to continue to do what we're offering. So I think I heard a lot of discussions over the weekend that we're all, not all of us, but most of us are trying to make our educations more relevant and more directly tooled to putting our graduates to work more effectively in a profession that's changing, in a construction delivery system that's changing. And if I heard correctly in the discussion about economies, the Ivy League schools, the private schools that are well endowed, are not having an economic problem. They're doing pretty well, and they're investing in doing even better, while the rest of us are not. And it seems to me that this is an interesting development. It seems to me that for a long time we've kind of pretended that we're all about the same game, but I think we've all known that there is a kind of class distinction, that the Ivy League schools could operate one way and do a certain kind of pursuit, and the rest of us aspired to do that kind of thing, but really we had different kinds of tools in order to do that. So we kind of pretended that we did this thing, but actually we were doing something else. And what I see happening is that this economic change is really going to separate us. There are really going to be two different paradigms, and we're not, those of us in the farm system are not going to be able to continue to pretend and maintain the fiction that we're doing that other kind of education. We're actually going to do a different kind of education. At first, that struck me as a black sky scenario. I want it to be a blue sky scenario. I want to figure out a way that we can, because it is, I think it's inevitable, especially if things continue the way they're going. So I'd like to figure out how we could acknowledge there could be two different kind of systems, how are we going to do them well, and how are we going to have them work together.
There's a lot of truth in that, and yet I like your point that you can turn the black to blue if you turn your thinking around about value. And you made my point about empowerment. Thank you very much. I do think that one of the common themes and perhaps the hope that we take away from this whole conference is the themes of empowering the fledgling architect, redefining the role of the architect in society, opening up avenues, and so on. Other questions, comments?
These are two profoundly important things that we should be discussing, not just being presented to. I've been talking about another model, something that I experienced a couple weeks ago with ICSID and Ikagrata and IFI under the banner of IDA, the International Design Alliance. ICSID and Ikagrata is communication design, graphic design, design in general. ICSID is industrial design, product system service design, things like this. They are not simply organizations of educators and of academics. They're international organizations of academics, practitioners, governments, industries, promotional entities. They're large entities that are diverse and with significant voice and power and influence. Not only do they exist as three legs, but now they've created this other thing called IDA, the International Design Alliance, where they all come together and increase their potency by drawing on their sort of disciplinary and professional strengths. So the last entity, a few weeks ago in Taipei, IDA presented a 3-day congress on critical themes with diverse panelists from the various disciplines. IFI is interiors and moving towards architecture and urbanism, so the kind of built environment. After the 3 days of a potent conference, a potent congress with probably, I think, 2,000 to 3,000 people involved, there were 2 days of general assemblies for each independent entity, 2 days of a general assembly to discuss relevant issues to the individual disciplines, for example, and to the individual professions. I'm glad to see that we have, an hour or half an hour to discuss some of the critical issues that face us all. But I'm wondering if we might not be able to assume another model of how we can actually have significant discussions and maybe action statements. We vote, for example, over those 2 days. We have elections for board of directors. They're incredibly important and potent events. IDA announced a statement on professional practice and basically saying, as a standard of being a member of ICSID, ICAGRADA, and IFI, and IDA, by the linkage of the 3 legs, that free work will not be acceptable, that you are not allowed to do free work as a professional. It was a first IDA sort of manifesto, if you will. And that allows people, especially in some countries, to say no to governments, for example, or other entities, that, sorry, we can't do free work by a code of professional ethics that we have to abide by as being members of this group. So it gives you kind of added power. So maybe we could do some kind of similar thing. Maybe ACSA would benefit by having a greater diversity of its members in terms of just education. There's certainly a benefit, but are there other benefits by making collaborations and cooperations and alignments? We talk about this in terms of our educational curriculum and intentions, the importance of collaboration, the importance of alliances, but yet we're not fully doing that yet. And I wonder if maybe at least the time to discuss this possibility, if not, in fact, actually move towards it. Thank you.
Anyone want to offer some information on where the organization is at the moment in terms of diversity of membership, or do you want to be more specific about who you think we could bring in?
Wanting to be more influential with governments, for example,
Okay.
More influential with industry in general. But are we inviting them to the table? Are we inviting them to the discussions? I think there's actually enormous amounts of money for research in architecture and urbanism and energy. And if architects don't accept that kind of responsibility to be part of that game, to be part of that money on urbanism, to be part of the money on energy, we're losing opportunities, and we're not kind of living up to our professional potentials and academic potentials. I think it was really nice, for example, when Washington University the other year did its conference, and the art folks were there. And it was architecture and art, for example. That's one instance. I think maybe we have to just enlarge the discussion beyond ourselves. I mean, we know what design thinking is. We know that its value. We don't need to tell each other the value of that anymore.
Others?
I wish Kim Tanzer was here, because isn't that what the National Academy for Design could do?
Judith. Well, I think that that's an important point. Thank you for bringing that up, Norman. As many of you know, ACSA, under the leadership of Kim Tanzer, helped to found 2 years ago or 3 years ago the inaugural National Academy of Environmental Design, which has, I think, 15 or 20 organizations. Daniel Friedman is the president-elect of it, I believe, of this group, and it brings that diversity, that rich diversity of groups that are tied to similar missions together to serve the country in addressing important questions. Now, it's a young and perhaps somewhat fragile organization, given the moment in which it was brought into being. But I do think that that's certainly one example of our organization taking a leadership role on those issues. And I refer you to Daniel for more information on this, and to Michael Monti, who has been very deeply involved.
There's a person who wants the mic back.
For example, AIGA. AIGA has moved from being the voice of graphic design to communication, and now under Rick's leadership and the kind of intention of AIGA, they're trying to become and are becoming the voice of design. Maybe we could talk with them occasionally. There's IDSA. There are a lot of other kind of collaterals that might bring some strength if we actually work together in terms of design and architecture and urbanism and all of these things. So it's a friendly proposition.
Also, coming from a state school, I want to second Robert's comments about this notion of we really can't sustain any more cuts. But I also really want to applaud the IE work and sort of understanding how business can inform design. And I think in 20th century design education, money was really a bad word. And, we, to try to get cost estimating into design studios, I get looks from faculty that we are, you're treading on sacred ground. Why are you, bringing money into the temple? But these research operations that engineering schools run are revenue generators. Gary Technologies, shop construction are getting into the area of revenue generation and construction by really taking on risk and assuming that risk, which in my experience is universities are terrified of risk. They're terrified of liability issues associated with design. So we are in many ways running up against a firewall of getting into that market simply because schools don't want to assume that sort of risk. But I think if one in this in the future, if we are to become driven by a revenue model, we're going to have to step up to that.
It's odd for me because many of these arguments about the role of design in the academy, I think that we've had those arguments at the University of Cincinnati and we've probably won them. The university is in many ways modeling itself after us over in the College of Design, Art, Architecture, and Planning. And so, I don't feel quite the same disciplinary angst about some of these things. I mean, we're watching the business school come to us. We're watching the medical school come to us. They're modeling themselves after us, and they're doing it at a time where we are still the most inefficient form of education on campus. But they see the value in it. And so I'm not quite as concerned. Yeah, there's clearly, that was two extreme examples in terms of the financing or the money that a couple of schools have relative to most of us. But I'm not sure that my biggest problem right now is money. In many ways, it's vision and dealing with how that vision is going to be transferred forward as this economy changes, as our students change, as the society changes. I'm still trying to figure out how to get these 17 and 18-year-old kids to a position where they can tackle some of these issues that we're facing as a society. I think that's a big issue. And I'm trying to figure out how to get there.
Having a few more faculty lines would help you get.
This is where you have to be political. If I could get the appropriate faculty in the appropriate spot, that would work.
First of all, I want to thank our panelists.